Sarah. I'm one of the New Education Project Aspire students, and I'm going to read you some books from the science fiction genre. Today I'm going to read you The Beginning of Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer. This is a great book for older kids. I don't want to give it away, so I'll just start reading. I won't read you the whole book though. I just want to get you interested enough in it so that you'll pick it up yourself. Chapter 1. The Book. Ho Chi Minh City in the summer. Sweltering by anyone's standards. Needless to say, Artemis Fowl would not have been willing to put up with such discomfort if something extremely important had not been at stake. Important to the plan. Sun did not suit Artemis. He did not look well in it. Long hours indoors in front of a computer screen had bleached the glow from his skin. He was white as a vampire, and almost as testy in the light of day. I hope this isn't another wild goose chase, Butler, he said, his voice soft and clipped, especially after Cairo. It was a gentle rebuke. They had traveled to Egypt on the word of the butler's informant. No, sir. I'm certain this time. Nugan is a good man. Droned Artemis, unconvinced. Passerbys would have been amazed to hear the large Eurasian man refer to the boy as Sir. This was, after all, the third millennium. But this was no ordinary relationship, and these were no ordinary tourists. They were sitting outside a curbside cafe on the Dong Kai Street, watching the local teenagers circle the square on mopeds. Nugan was late, and the pathetic patch of shade provided by the umbrella was doing little to improve Artemis's mood. But this was just his daily pessimism. Beneath the sulk was a spark of hope. Could this trip really yield results? Would they find the book? It was too much to hope for. A waiter scurried to their table. More tea, sirs? He asked, bobbing his head furiously. Artemis sighed. Spare me the theatrics and sit down. The waiter turned instinctively to Butler, who was, after all, the adult. But, sir, I'm the waiter? Artemis tapped the table for attention. You are wearing handmade loafers, a silk shirt, and 3 golden signet rings. Your English has a tinge of Oxford about it, and your nails have the soft sheen of recent manicure. You are not the waiter. You are our contact, Nugan Zahn, and you have adopted this pathetic disguise to discreetly check for weaponry. Nugan's shoulders sagged. It's true. Amazing. Hardly. A ragged apron does not a waiter make. Nugan sat, pouring some mint tea into a tiny china cup. Let me fill you in on the weapon status, continued Artemis. I am unarmed. But Butler here, my, Butler, has a 6-Sawyer in his shoulder holster, 2 shriek-throwing knives in his boots, a Ringer 2-shot up his sleeve, and Garrett wire in his watch, and 3 stun grenades concealed in various pockets. Anything else, Butler? The Kosh, sir. Ah, yes. A good old ball-bearing Kosh stuffed down his shirt. Nugan brought the cup, trembling to his lips. Don't be alarmed, Mr. Wan. Artemis smiled. The weapons will not be used on you. Nugan did not seem reassured. No, continued Artemis. Butler could kill you in 100 different ways without the use of his weapons, though I'm sure just one would be quite sufficient. Nugan was by now thoroughly spooked. Artemis generally had that effect on people, a pale adolescent speaking with the authority and vocabulary of a powerful adult. Nugan had heard the name Fowl before. Who hadn't in the international underworld? But he'd assumed he'd be dealing with Artemis Sr., not this boy. Though the word boy hardly seemed to do this gaunt individual justice. And the giant, Butler? It was obvious that he could snap a man's neckbone like a twig with those mammoth hands. Nugan was starting to think that no amount of money was worth another minute in this strange company. And now to business, said Artemis, placing a micro recorder on the table. You answered our web advertisement. Nugan nodded, suddenly praying that his information was accurate. Yes, Mr. Master Fowl. You're looking for... I know where it is. Really? And I'm supposed to just take your word for this? You could be walking me straight into an ambush. My family is not without enemies. Butler snatched a mosquito out of the air beside his employer's ear. No, said Nugan, reaching for his wallet. Here, look! Artemis studied the Polaroid. He willed his heart to maintain a calm beat. It seemed promising, but anything could be faked these days with a PC and a flatbed scanner. The picture showed a hand reaching from layered shadows, a molten green hand. He murmured. Explain. This woman, she's a healer near Tudo Street. She works in exchange for rice wine. All the time. Drunk. Artemis nodded. It made sense. The drinking. One of the few consistent facts his research had unearthed. He stood, pulling the creases from his white polo shirt. Very well. Lead on, Mr. Wan. Nugans wiped the sweat from his stingy mustache. Information only. That was the agreement. I don't want any curses on my head. Butler expertly gripped the informant from behind the neck. I'm sorry, Mr. Wan, but the time when you had a choice in the matter is long past. Butler steered the protesting Vietnamese man to the rented four-wheel drive. It was hardly necessary on the flat streets of Ho Chi Minh City, or Saigon, as the locals still call it, but Artemis preferred to be as insulated from civilians as possible. The Jeep inched forward at a painfully slow rate, made all the more excruciating by the anticipation building in Artemis's chest. He could suppress it no longer. Could they at last be at the end of their quest? After 6 false alarms and 3 continents, could this wine-sodden healer be the gold at the end of the rainbow? Artemis almost chuckled. Gold at the end of a rainbow. He'd made a joke. Now there's something that doesn't happen every day. The mopeds partied like fish in a giant shoal. There seemed to be no end to the crowds. Even the alleyways were full to the bursting with vendors and hagglers. Cooks dropped fish heads into walks of hissing oil, and urchins threaded their way underfoot, searching for unguarded valuables. Others sat in the shade, wearing out their thumbs on the Game Boys. Nugan was sweating right through his khaki top. It wasn't the humidity. He was used to that. It was this whole cursed situation. He should have known better than to mix magic and crime. He made a silent promise that if he got out of this, he was going to change his ways. No more answering shady internet requests, and certainly no more consorting with the sons of European crime lords. The Jeep could go only so far. Eventually, the side streets grew too narrow for the four-wheel drive. Artemis turned to Nugan. It seems we must proceed on foot, Master Wan. Run if you like, but expect a sharp and fatal pain between your shoulder blades. Nugan glanced into Butler's eyes. There was a deep blue, almost black. There was no mercy in those eyes. Don't worry, he said. I won't run. They climbed from the vehicle. 1,000 suspicious eyes followed their progress along the steaming alley. An unfortunate pickpocket attempted to steal Butler's wallet. The manservant broke the man's fingers without even looking down. They were given a wide berth after that. The alley narrowed to a rutted lane. Sewage and drain pipes fed directly into the muddy surface. Cripples and beggars huddled on rice mat islands. Most of the residents of this lane had nothing to spare, with the exception of 3. Well, demanded Artemis. Where is she? Nugan jabbed a finger towards a black triangle beneath a rusted fire escape. There. Under there. Never comes out. Even to buy rice spirits, she sends a runner. Can I go now? Artemis didn't bother answering. Instead, he picked his way across the puddled lane to the lee of the fire escape. He could discern furtive movements in the shadows. Butler, could you hand me the goggles? Butler plucked a set of night vision glasses from his belt and placed them in Artemis's outstretched hand. The focus motor buzzed to suit the light. Artemis fixed the glasses to his face. Everything became radioactive green. Taking a deep breath, he turned his gaze to the squirming shadows. Something squatted on a raffia mat, shifting uneasily in almost a non-existent light. Artemis fine-tuned the focus. The figure was small, abnormally so, and wrapped in a filthy shawl. Empty spirit jugs were half buried in the mud around her. One forearm poked from the material. It seemed green, but then so did everything else. "Madam," he said, "I have a proposition for you." The figure's head wobbled sleepily. "Wine," she rasped, her voice like nails on a school chalkboard. "Wine. English." Artemis smiled. "The gift of tongues. Check. Aversion to light. Check. Irish, actually. Now, about my proposition." The healer took a bony finger craftily. "Wine first, then talk." "Butler." The bodyguard reached into a pocket and drew out a half pint of the finest Irish whiskey. Artemis took the bottle and held it teasingly beyond the shadows. He barely had time to remove his goggles when a claw-like hand darted out from the gloom to snatch the whiskey. A molted green hand. There was no doubt. Artemis swallowed a triumphant grin. "Pay our friend Butler, in full. Remember, Master Juan, this is between us. You don't want Butler to come back, do you?" No, Master Fowl. My lips are sealed." "They had better be, or Butler will seal them permanently." Nugan skipped off down the alley, so relieved to be alive that he didn't even bother counting the sheaf of U.S. currency. Most unlike him. In any event, it was all there. All $20,000. Not bad for half an hour's work. Artemis turned back to the healer. "Now, madam, you have something I want." The healer's tongue caught a drop of alcohol in the corner of her mouth. "Yes, Irish. Sore head. Bad tooth. I heal." Artemis replaced the night vision goggles and squatted to her level. "I am perfectly healthy, madam, apart from a slight dust mite allergy, and I don't think you can do anything about that. No, what I want from you is your book." The hag froze. Bright eyes glinted from beneath the shawl. "Book?" she said cautiously. "I don't know about no book. I am healer. You want book? Go to the library." Artemis sighed with exaggerated patience. "You are no healer. You are a sprite, a shog, a fairy, a cuddalum, whichever language you prefer to use. And I want your book." For a long moment, the creature said nothing. Then she threw back the shawl from her forehead. In the green glow of the night vision goggles, her features leaped at Artemis like a Halloween mask. The fairy's nose was long and hooked under two slitted golden eyes. Her ears were pointed, and the alcohol addiction had melted her skin like putty. "If you know about the book, human," she said slowly, fighting the numb effects of the whiskey, "then you know about the magic I have in my fist. I can kill you with the snap of my fingers." Artemis shrugged. "I think not. Look at you. You're near dead. The rice wine has dulled your senses, reduced to healing warts. Pathetic. I'm here to save you. In return, for the book." "What could a human want with our book?" "That is no concern of yours. All you need to know are your options." The sprite's pointed ears quivered. "Options?" "1. You refuse to give us the book, and we go home, leaving you here to rot in the sewer." "Yes," said the fairy. "I choose this option." "Ah, don't be so eager. If we leave here without the book, you'll be dead in a day." "A day? A day?" The healer laughed. "I'll outlive you by a century. Even fairies tethered to the human realm can survive the ages." "Not with half a pint of holy water inside of them," said Artemis, tapping the now empty bottle of whiskey. The fairy blanched, then screamed, a high-pitched, keening, horrible sound. "Holy water! You have murdered me, human!" "True," admitted Artemis. "It should start to burn any minute now." The fairy poked her stomach tentatively. "The second option? Listen listening now, are we? Very well then. Option 2. You give me the book for 30 minutes only, and then I return your magic to you. The sprite's jaw dropped. Return my magic? That's not possible. Oh, but it is. I have in my possession 2 ampoules. One, a vial of spring water from the fairy well 60 meters below the Ring of Tara. Possibly the most magical place on Earth. This will counteract the holy water. And the other? The other is a little shot of man-made magic. A virus that feeds on alcohol mixed with a growth agent. It will flush every drop of rice wine from your body, remove the dependence, and even bolster your failing liver. It'll be messy, but after a day you'll be zipping around as though you were 1,000 years old again. The sprite licked her lips. To be able to rejoin the people? Tempting. How do I know to trust you, human? You've tricked me once already. Good point. Here's the deal. I give you the water on faith. Then, after I've had a look at the book, you get the bolster. Take it or leave it. The fairy considered. The pain was already curling around in her abdomen. She thrust out her wrist. I'll take it. I thought you might. Butler. The giant manservant unwrapped a soft, velcroed case containing a syringe gun and 2 vials. He loaded the clear one, shooting it into the sprite fairy's clammy arm. The fairy stiffened momentarily, and then she relaxed. Strong magic, she breathed. Yes, but not as strong as your own will be when I give you the second injection. Now the book. The sprite reached into the fold of her filthy robe, rummaging for an age. Artemis held his breath. This was it. Soon the Fowls would be great again. A new empire would rise, with Artemis Fowl II at its head. The fairy woman withdrew a closed fist. No use to you anyway, written in the old tongue. Artemis nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She opened her knobby fingers. Laying in her palm was a tiny golden volume the size of a matchbook. Here, human. 30 of your minutes, no more. Butler took the tiny tome reverently. The bodyguard activated a compact digital camera and began photographing each of the wafer-thin pages of the book. The process took several minutes. When he was finished, the entire volume was stored on the camera's chip. Artemis preferred not to take chances with information. Airport security equipment had been known to wipe many a vital disk, so he instructed his aide to transfer the file to his portable phone, and from there email it to Fowl Manor in Dublin. Before the 30 minutes were up, the file, containing every symbol in the fairy book, was safely sitting in the Fowl server. Artemis returned the tiny volume to its owner. Nice doing business with you. The sprite lurched forward on her knees. The other potion, human. Artemis smiled. Ah, yes, the restoring booster. I suppose I did promise. Yes, human promised. Very well. But, before we administer it, I must warn you that the purging is not pleasant. You are not going to enjoy this one bit. The fairy gestured around at her squalid filth. You think I enjoy this? I want to fly again. Butler loaded the second vial, shooting this one straight into the catharded artery. The sprite immediately collapsed on the mat, her whole frame quivering violently. Time to leave, commented Artemis. 100 years of alcohol leaving a body by any means possible is not a pretty sight. The butlers had been serving the fowls for centuries. It had always been that way. Indeed, there were several eminent linguists of the opinion that this was how the common noun had originated. The first record of this unusual arrangement was when Virgil Butler had been contracted as a servant, bodyguard, and cook to Lord Hugo de Fowl for one of the first great Norman Crusades. At the age of 10, Butler children were sent to a private training center in Israel, where they were taught the specialized skills necessary to guard the latest in the Fowl line. These skills included cordon bleu cooking, marksmanship, a customized blend of martial arts, emergency medicine, and information technology. If, at the end of their training, there was not a fowl to guard, then the butlers were eagerly snapped up as bodyguards for various royal personages, generally in Monaco or Saudi Arabia. Once a fowl and a butler were put together, they were paired for life. It was a demanding job and lonely, but the rewards were handsome if you survived to enjoy them. If not, then your family received a 6-figure settlement plus a monthly pension. The current butler had been guarding young Master Artemis for 12 years, since the moment of his birth. And though they had adhered to the old age formalities, they were much more than master and servant. Artemis was the closest thing Butler had to a friend, and Butler was the closest thing Artemis had to a father. Albeit one who obeyed orders. Butler held his tongue until they were aboard the Heathrow connection from Bangkok, and then he had to ask, "Artemis?" Artemis looked up from the screen of his power book. He was getting a head start on the translation. "Yes." The sprite. "Why didn't we simply keep the book and leave her to die?" "A corpse is evidence, Butler. My way, the people will have no reason to be suspicious." "But the sprite? I hardly think she'll confess to showing the humans the book. In any case, I mixed a slight amnesiac into her second injection. When she finally wakes up, the last week will be a blur." Butler nodded appreciatively. Always 2 steps ahead, that Master Artemis. People said he was a chip off the old block. They were wrong. Master Artemis was a brand new block, the likes of which had never been seen before. Doubts assaulted, Butler returned to his copy of Guns and Ammo, leaving his employer to unravel the secrets of the universe. Chapter 2, The Translation. And I just want to point out to you guys, if you look at the very bottom of this book, there are a bunch of characters. This is the fairy language that Artemis is trying to transcribe, and it's at the bottom of every single page in this book. And you can actually transcribe it to get a whole nother story, if you choose to. There's code breakers on the internet so that you can figure out what it says. Chapter 2, Translation. By now, you must have guessed just how far Artemis Fowl was prepared to go in order to achieve his goal. But what exactly was this goal? What outlandish scheme could involve the blackmailing of an alcohol-addicted sprite? The answer was gold. Artemis's search had begun 2 years previously when he first became interested in surfing the internet. He quickly found the more arcane sites, alien abduction, UFO sightings, and the supernatural, but most specifically the existence of the people. Trawling through gigabytes of data, he found hundreds of references to fairies from nearly every country in the world. Each civilization had its own term for the people, but they were undoubtedly members of the same hidden family. Several stories mentioned a book carried by each fairy, who was their Bible, containing, as it allegedly did, the history of their race and the commandments that governed their extended lives. Of course, this book was written in Gnomish, the fairy language, and that would be of no use to any human. Artemis believed that with today's technology, the book could be translated, and with this translation, you could begin to exploit a whole new group of creatures. Know thine enemy was Artemis's motto, so he immersed himself in the lore of the people until he had compiled a huge database on their characteristics. But it wasn't enough. So Artemis put out a call on the web. Irish businessman will pay large amount of US dollars to meet a fairy, sprite, leprechaun, or pixie. The responses had been mostly fraudulent, but Ho Chi Minh City had finally paid off. Artemis was perhaps the only person alive who could take full advantage of his recent acquisition. He still retained a childlike belief in magic, tempered by an adult determination to exploit it. If there was anybody capable of relieving the fairies of some of their magical gold, it was Artemis Fowl II. It was early morning before they reached Fowl Manor. Artemis was anxious to bring up the file on his computer. But first he decided to call in on his mother. Angeline Fowel was bedridden. She had been since her husband's disappearance. Nervous tension, the physician said. Nothing for it but rest and sleeping pills. That was almost a year ago. Butler's little sister, Juliet, was sitting at the foot of the stairs. Her gaze was boring a hole in the wall. Even the glitter mascara couldn't soften her expression. Artemis had seen that look already, just before Juliet had sublexed a particularly impudent pizza boy. The subplex, Artemis gathered, was a wrestling move. An unusual obsession for a teenage girl. But then again, she was, after all, a butler. Problems, Juliet? Juliet straightened hurriedly. My own fault, Artemis. Apparently I left a gap in the curtains. Miss Fowl couldn't fall asleep. Muttered Artemis, scaling the oak staircase slowly. He worried about his mother's condition. She hadn't seen the light of day in a long time now. Then again, should she miraculously recover, emerging revitalized from her bed chamber, it would signal the end of Artemis's own extraordinary freedom. It would be back off to school, and no more spearheading criminal enterprises for you, my boy. He knocked gently on the arched double doors. Mother, are you awake? Something smashed against the other side of the door. It sounded expensive. Of course I'm awake. How can I sleep in this blinding glare? Artemis ventured inside. An antique four-poster bed threw shadowy spires in the darkness, and a pale sliver of light poked through a gap in the velvet curtains. Angeline Fowl sat hunched on the bed, her pale limbs glowing white in the gloom. Artemis, darling, where have you been? Artemis sighed. She recognized him. That was a good sign. School trip, Mother. Skiing in Austria. Ah, skiing, crooned Angeline. How I miss it. Maybe when your father returns. Darling, could you close those wretched curtains? The light is intolerable. Of course, Mother. Artemis felt his way across the room, weary of low-level clothes chests scattered around on the floor. Finally, his fingers curled on the velvet drapes. For a moment, he was tempted to throw them wide open. Then he sighed and closed the gap. Thank you, darling. By the way, we really have to get rid of that maid. She is absolutely good for nothing. Artemis held his tongue. Juliet had been a hard-working and loyal member of the Fowl household for the past 3 years. Time to use Mother's absent-mindedness to his advantage. You're right. Of course, Mother. I've been meaning to do it for some time now. Butler has a sister. Butler has a sister I believe would be perfect for the position. I believe I mentioned her. Juliet? Angeline frowned. Juliet. Yes, the name does sound familiar. Well, anyone would be better than that silly girl we have now. When can she start? Straight away. I'll have Butler fetch her from the lodge. You're such a good boy, Artemis. Give Mummy a hug. Artemis stepped into the shadowy folds of his mother's robe. She smelled perfumed, like petals in water. But her arms were cold and weak. Oh, darling, she whispered. The sound sent goosebumps popping down Artemis's neck. I hear things at night. They crawl along the pillows and into my ears. Artemis felt that lump in his throat again. Perhaps we should open the curtains, Mother. No! His mother sobbed, releasing her from her grasp. No, because then I would see them too. Mother, please. But it was of no use. Angeline was gone. She crawled to the far corner of the bed, pulled the quilt up under her chin. Send the new girl. Yes, Mother. Send her with cucumber slices and water. Yes, Mother. Angeline glared at him with crafty eyes. And stop calling me Mother. I don't know who you are, but you're certainly not my little Artie. Artemis blinked back a few rebellious tears. Yes, of course. Sorry, Sorry. Don't come back here again, or I'll have my husband take care of you. He's a very important man, you know. Very well, Miss Fowl. This is the last you'll see of me. It had better be. Angeline froze suddenly. Do you hear that? Artemis shook his head. No, I don't hear any. They're coming for me. They're everywhere. Angeline dived for cover beneath the bedclothes. Artemis could still hear her terrified sobs as he descended the marble staircase. The book was proving far more stubborn than Artemis had anticipated. It seemed to be almost actively resisting him. No matter which program he ran it through, the computer came up blank. Artemis hard-copied every page, tacking them onto the walls of his study. Sometimes it helped to have things on paper. The script was nothing like he had seen before, and yet strangely familiar. Obviously a mixture of symbolic and character-based language, the text meandered around the page in no apparent order. What the program needed was a frame of reference, some central point on which to build. He separated all the characters and ran comparisons with English, Chinese, Greek, Arabic, and with Cyrillic text. Even with Ogham, nothing. Moody with frustration, Artemis sent Juliet scurrying when she interrupted with sandwiches and moved on to the symbols. The most frequently recurring pictogram was a small male figure. Male, he presumed, though with the limited knowledge of fairy anatomy, he presumed it could be female. A thought struck him. Artemis opened the ancient language files on his power translator and selected Egyptian. At last, a hint! The male symbol was remarkably similar to the Anubis god representation and the Tutankhamun's inner chamber hieroglyphics. This was consistent with his other findings. The first written human stories were about fairies, suggesting that their civilization predated man's own, and it would seem that the Egyptians had simply adapted an existing scripture to suit their needs. There were other resemblances, but the characters were just dissimilar enough to slip through the computer's net. This would have to be done manually. Each gnomish figure had to be enlarged, printed, and then compared with the hieroglyphs. Artemis felt the excitement of success thumping inside his ribcage. Almost every fairy pictogram or letter had an Egyptian counterpart. Most were universal, such as the sun or birds, but some seemed exclusively supernatural and had to be tailored to fit. The Anubis figure, for example, would make no sense as a dog god, so Artemis altered it to read King of the Fairies. And by midnight, Artemis had successfully fed his findings into the Macintosh. All he had to do now was press decode. He did so. What emerged was a long, intricate string of meaningless gibberish. A normal child would have abandoned the task long since. The average adult probably would have been reduced to slapping the keyboard. But not Artemis. This book was testing him, and he would not allow it to win. The letters were right. He was certain of it. It was just the order that was wrong. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, Artemis glared at the pages again. Each segment was bordered by a solid line. This could represent paragraphs or chapters, but they were not meant to be read in the usual left to right, top to bottom fashion. He experimented. He tried the Arabic right to left and the Chinese columns. Nothing worked. Then he noticed that each page had one thing in common: a central section. The other pictograms were arranged around this pivotal area. So, central starting point, perhaps? But where to go from there? Artemis scanned the pages for some other common factor, and after several minutes, he found it. There was on each page a tiny spearhead in the corner of one section. Could this be an arrow? A direction? Go this way? So the theory would be, start at the middle, then follow the arrow, reading in spirals. The computer program wasn't built to handle something like this, so Artemis had to improvise. With a craft knife and ruler, he dissected the first page of the book and reassembled it in the traditional Western languages order, left to right, parallel rows. Then he rescanned the page and fed it through the modified Egyptian translator. And there's a picture of what it looks like for how he cut it up. And if you notice, they are the same symbols at the bottom of every page in the book. The computer hummed and whirled. It converted all the information to binary. Sometimes it stopped to ask for confirmation of a character or symbol. This happened less and less as the machine learned the new language. Eventually, 2 words flashed across the screen. File converted. Fingers shaking from exhaustion and excitement, Artemis clicked print. A single page scrolled from the laser writer. It was in English now. Yes, there were mistakes and some fine-tuning needed, but it was perfectly legible and, more important, perfectly understandable. Fully aware that he was probably the first human in several thousand years to decode the magical words, Artemis switched on his desk light and began to read. The Book of the People. Book is spelled with an E, too. Being instructions to our magics and life rules. Carry me always, carry me well. I am thy teacher of herb and spell. I am thy link to powers arcane. Forget me, and thy magic shall wane. 10 times 10 commandments there be. They will answer every mystery. Curses, cures, curses, and alchemy. These secrets shall be thine through me. But, fairy, remember this above all, I am not for those in mud that crawl, and forever doomed shall be the one who betrays my secrets one by one. Artemis could hear the blood pumping in his ears. He had them. This would be as ants beneath his feet. Their every secret would be laid bare by technology. Suddenly, exhaustion claimed him, and he sank back in his chair. There was so much yet to complete. 43 pages to be translated for a start. He pressed the intercom button that linked him to the speakers all over the house. Butler, get Juliet and come up here. I have some jigsaws I need you to assemble. Perhaps a little family history would be useful at this point. The Fowls were, indeed, legendary criminals. For generations, they had skirmished on the wrong side of the law, hoarding enough funds to become legitimate. Of course, once they were legitimate, they found it to not be to their liking, and almost immediately returned to crime. It was Artemis I, our subject's father, who had thrown the family fortune into jeopardy. With the breakup of communist Russia, Artemis Sr. had decided to invest a huge chunk of the Fowl fortune into establishing new shipping lines to the vast continent. New consumers, he reasoned, would need new consumer goods. The Russian Mafia did not take too kindly to a Westerner muscling in on their market, so they decided to send a little message. This message took the form of a stolen missile launched at Fowl Star on her way past Murmansk. Artemis Sr. was on board that ship, along with Butler's uncle and 250,000 cans of cola. It was quite an explosion. The Fowls were not left destitute. Far from it. But billionaire status was no longer theirs. Artemis II vowed to remedy this. He would restore the family fortune, and he would do it in his own unique fashion. Once the book was translated, Artemis could begin planning in earnest. He already knew what the ultimate goal was. Now he could figure out how to achieve it. Gold, of course, was the objective, the acquisition of gold. It seemed that the people were almost as fond of the precious metal as humans. Each fairy had its own cache, but not for much longer if Artemis had his way. There would be at least one of the fairy folk wandering around with empty pockets by the time he was finished. After 18 solid hours of sleep and a light continental breakfast, Artemis climbed to the study that he had inherited from his father. It was a traditional enough room, dark oak and floor-to-ceiling shelving, but Artemis had jammed it with the latest computer technology. A series of networked Apple Macs whirled from various corners of the room. One was running CNN's website through a DAT projector, throwing an oversized current affairs image against the back wall. Butler was already there, firing up the hard drives. Shut them all down, except the book. I need quiet for this. The manservant started. The CNN site had been running for almost a year. Artemis was convinced that news of his father's rescue would come from there. Shutting it down meant he was finally letting go. All of them? Artemis glanced at the back wall for a moment. Yes, he said finally. All of them. Butler took the liberty of patting his employer gently on the shoulder. Just once, before returning to work. Artemis cracked his knuckles. Time to do what he did but best. Plot dastardly deeds. Chapter 3. Holly. Holly Short was lying in bed, silently fuming. Nothing unusual about this. Leprechauns in general were not known for their geniality. But Holly was exceptionally bad, in an exceptionally bad mood, even for a fairy. Technically, she was an elf, fairy being the general term. She was a leprechaun too, but that was just a job. Perhaps a description would be more helpful than a lecture on fairy genealogy. Holly Short had nut brown skin, cropped auburn hair, and hazel eyes. Her nose had a hook, and her mouth was plump and cherubic, which was appropriate considering Cupid was her great-grandfather. Her mother was European, with a fiery temper and willowy figure. Holly, too, had a slim frame, with long, tapered fingers, perfect for wrapping around a buzz baton. Her ears, of course, were pointed. At exactly 3 feet in height, Holly was only a centimeter below average fairy height. But even 1 centimeter can make an awful lot of difference when you don't have that many to spare. Commander Root was the cause of Holly's distress. Root had been on Holly's case since day one. The commander had decided to take offense at the fact that the first female officer in Recon's history had been assigned to his squad. Recon was a notoriously dangerous posting with a high fatality rate, and Root didn't think it was any place for a girlie. Well, he was just going to have to get used to the idea because Holly Short had no intention of quitting for him or anybody else. Though she'd never admit it, another possible cause for Holly's irritability was the ritual. She'd been meaning to perform it for several moons now, but somehow there was just never enough time. And if Root found out she was running low on magic, she'd be transferred to traffic for sure. Holly rolled off her futon and stumbled into the shower. That was one advantage of living near Earth's core. The water was always hot. No natural light, of course. But that was a small price to pay for privacy. Underground. The last human-free zone. There was nothing like coming home after a long day on the job, switching off your shield and sinking into the bubbling slime pool. Bliss. The fairy suited up, zipping the dull green jumpsuit up to her chin and strapping on her helmet. Recon uniforms were stylish these days. Not like the top-of-the-morning costume the Force had to wear back in the old days. Buckle shoes and knickerbockers. Honestly, no wonder leprechauns were such a ridiculous figure in human folklore. Still, probably better that way. If mud people knew the word leprechaun had actually originated from Recon, an elite branch of the lower elements police, they'd probably take steps to stamp them out. Better to stay inconspicuous and let the humans have their stereotypes. The moon was already rising on the surface. There was no time for a proper breakfast. Holly grabbed the remains of a nettle smoothie from the cooler and drank it in the tunnels. As usual, there was chaos in the main thoroughfare. Airborne sprites jammed the avenue like stones in a bottle. The gnomes weren't helping either, lumbering along with their big swinging behinds blocking 2 lanes. Swear-toads infested every damp patch, cursing like sailors. That particular breed began as a joke, but had multiplied into an epidemic. Someone lost their wand over that one. Holly battled through the crowds to the police station. There was already a riot outside Spud's Emporium. Corporal Newt was trying to sort it out. Good luck to him. Nightmare. At least Holly got the chance to work above ground. The LEP station doors were crammed with protesters. The goblin-dwarf turf war had flared up again, and every morning hordes of angry parents showed up demanding for the release of their innocent offspring. Holly snorted, as if there was actually an innocent goblin. Holly Short had yet to meet him. They were clogging up the cells now, howling gang chants and hurling fireballs at each other. Holly shuddered, shouldered her way into the throng. "Coming through," she grunted. "Police business." They were on her like flies on a stink worm. "Miss Grumpo is innocent." "Police brutality." "Officer, would you take my baby his blankie? He can't sleep without it." Holly set her visor to reflect and ignored them all. Once upon a time, the uniform would have earned you some respect. Not anymore. Now you were a target. "Excuse me, officer, but I seem to have misplaced my jar of warts." "Pardon me, young elf, but my cat's climbed a stalactite." Or, "If you have a minute, Captain, could you tell me how to get to the Fountain of Youth?" Holly shuddered. Tourist. She had troubles of her own, more than she knew, as she was about to find out. In the station lobby, a kleptomaniac dwarf was busy picking the pockets of everyone else in the booking line, including the officer he was handcuffed to. Holly gave him a swipe in the backside with her buzz baton. The electric charge singed the seat of his leather pants. "What you doing there, Mulch?" Mulch started, contraband dropping from his sleeves. "Officer Short," he whined, his face a mask of regret. I can't help myself. It's my nature." "I know that, Mulch, and it's in our nature to throw you in a cell for a couple centuries." She winked at the dwarf's arresting officer. "Nice to see you're staying alert." The elf blushed, kneeling to pick up his wallet and badge. Holly forged past Ruth's office, hoping she could make it to her cubicle before... "Short! Get in here!" Holly sighed. "Oh, well, here we go again." Stowing her helmet under her arm, Holly smoothed the creases from her uniform and stepped into Commander Root's office. Root's face was purple with rage. This was more or less his general state of existence, a fact that had earned him the nickname Beetroot. There was an office pool running on how long he had before his heart exploded. The smart money was on half a century at the outside. Commander Root was tapping his moonometer on his wrist. "Well? What time do you call this?" Holly could feel her own face coloring. She was barely a minute late. There was at least a dozen officers on their shift who haven't even reported in yet. But Root was always signaling her out for persecution. "The thoroughfare," she mumbled lamely. "There were 4 lanes down." "Don't insult me with your excuses," roared the commander. "You know what city center is like. Get up a few minutes earlier." It was true. And she did know the Haven was like that. She did know what Haven was like. Holly Short was a city elf born and bred. Since the humans had begun experimenting with mineral drilling, more and more fairies had been driven out of the shallow forts and into the depth and security of Haven City. The metropolis was overcrowded and underserviced, and now there was a lobby to allow automobiles in the pedestrianized city center, as if the place wasn't smelly enough already with all those country gnomes lumbering about the place. Root was right. She should get up a bit earlier. But she wouldn't. Not until everybody else was forced to. "I know what you're thinking," said Root. "Why am I picking on you every day? Why don't I ever ball out those other layabouts?" Holly said nothing, but agreement was written all over her face. "I'll tell you why, shall I?" Holly wristed on. "It's 'cause you're a girl." Holly felt her fingers curl into fists. She knew it. "But not for the reasons you think," continued Root. "You're the first girl in Recon. Ever. You're a test case, a beacon. There are 1,000,000 fairies out there watching your every move. There's a lot of hope riding on you. But there's a lot of prejudice against you, too. The future of law enforcement is in your hands, and at the moment, I'd say it was a little heavy." Holly blinked. Root had never said anything like that to her before. Usually it was just, fix your helmet, stand up straight, blah, blah, blah. But you have to be the best you can be, Short, and that has to be better than everybody else, Root sighed, sinking into his swivel chair. I don't know, Holly. Ever since that Hamburg incident... Holly winced. The Hamburg incident had been a total disaster. One of her perps had skipped out to the surface and tried to bargain with the mud people for asylum. Root had to stop time, call in the retrieval squad, and do 4 memory wipes. A lot of police time was wasted, and it was all her fault. The commander took a form from his desk. It's no use. I've made up my mind. I'm putting you on traffic and bringing in Corporal Frowned. Frowned? Exploded Holly. She's a bimbo in Airhead. You can't make her the test case. Root's face turned an even deeper shade of purple. I can, and I will. Why shouldn't I? You've never given me your best. Either that, or your best just isn't good enough. Sorry, Short. You've had your chance. The commander turned back to his paperwork. The meeting was over. Holly could only stand there aghast. She'd blown it. The best career opportunity she'd ever likely to get, and she tossed it in the gutter. 1 minute and her future was past. It wasn't fair. Holly felt an uncharacteristic anger take hold of her, but she swallowed it. This was no time to lose her temper. Commander Root, sir, I feel I deserve one more chance. Root didn't even look up from his paperwork. And why is that? Holly took a deep breath. Because of my record, sir. It speaks for itself. Apart from the Hamburg thing. 10 successful recons. Not a single memory wipe or time stop apart from the Hamburg thing, completed Root. Holly took a chance. If I were Mal, one of your previous sprites, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Root glanced up sharply. Now just a minute, Captain Short. He was interrupted by the bleeping of one of the phones on his desk. Then 2, then 3. A giant view screen crackled to life in the wall behind him. Root jabbed the speaker button, putting all the callers on conference. Yes, we've got a runner. Root nodded. Anything on Scoops? Scoops was the shop name for the shrouded trackers attached to the American communication satellites. Yep, said caller 2. Big blip in Europe. Southern Italy. No shield. Root cursed. An unshielded fairy could be seen by the mortal eye. That wasn't so bad if the perp was humanoid. Classification? Bad news, Commander, said the third caller. We've got a rogue troll. Root rubbed his eyes. Why did all these things happen on his watch? Holly could understand his frustration. Trolls were the meanest of the deep tunnel creatures. They wandered the labyrinth, preying on anything unlucky enough to cross their path. Their tiny brains had no room for rules or restraint. Occasionally, one found its way into the shaft of a pressure elevator. Usually, the concentrated air fried them, but sometimes one survived and was blasted to the surface. Driven crazy by pain and even the tiniest amount of light, they would generally proceed to destroy everything in their path. Root shook his head rapidly, recovering himself. Okay, Captain Short, looks like you get your chance. You're running hot, I take it? Yes, sir, lied Holly, all too aware that Root would suspend her immediately if he knew she neglected the ritual. Good, then sign yourself out a sidearm and proceed to the target area. Holly glanced at the view screen. Scopes were sending high-res shots of an Italian fortified town. A red dot was rapidly moving to the countryside towards the human population. Do a thorough reconnaissance and report in. Do not attempt a retrieval. Is that understood? Yes, sir. We lost 6 men to troll attacks last quarter. 6 men. That was below ground, in familiar territory. I understand, sir. Root pursed his lips doubtfully. Do you understand, Short? Do you really? I think so, sir. Have you ever seen what a troll can do to flesh and bone? No, sir. Not up close. Good. Let's not make today your first time. Understood. Root glared at her. I don't know why it is, Captain Short, but whenever you start agreeing with me, I get decidedly nervous. Root was right to be nervous. If he had known how straightforward If he'd known how this straightforward recon assignment was going to turn out, he probably would have retired right then and there. Tonight, history was going to be made, and it wasn't the discovery of radium, first man on the moon, happy kind of history. It was the Spanish Inquisition. Here comes the Hindenburg, bad kind of history. Bad for humans and fairies. Bad for everyone. And I'm going to stop right there, midway through chapter 3. If you want to know what happens to Holly, and if Artemis manages to use his super tech to get their gold, you'll have to finish reading Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer, and there's actually several other books in the series. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you pick it up to read it. Bye!